Hello everyone, and welcome to this live Q&A session that we've got here for
Hello everyone, and welcome to this.
Sorry about that. It was just there's a bit of a delay on the sound coming through my system, but I sorted that now. So I'll start again. Thank you very much for joining us for this live Q&A session here. If you are interested in any more of the things that we have on offer here at Strategic Financial Trading, please do subscribe to this video or subscribe to this account, and also check out the website www.astranti.com, where there is many free resources as well as some more premium resources. And also just take the time to advertise the masterclass that I am hosting this Saturday, which is a 6-7 hour class teaching you or going through all the various different key bits of information, extra tips that may help you pass the exam next week, because of course it is only a week away now. So we're going to have about half an hour just to look over some different questions that you've been posting in, or ones that you post throughout the course of this class. There's actually quite a substantial list already there, so I'll start at the top and start going through those. And if I don't have the time to answer your question, if more questions come in over the course of this session, then please email them into the office and I will endeavour to answer them as quickly as possible. The first question I've got here is there a standard way in which I should approach a question in the exam, a method for approaching it? Well, of course, the key thing here is always to plan your time effectively. And a lot of students don't like doing this. They don't like to plan. They like to open up the exam paper and just crack on as much as they can from the get-go. And that's really not a particularly good approach. Planning is actually really effective in this particular exam, and it's one of the main reasons students fail the strategic case study exam. I've been teaching it for many years now, is that they do not plan effectively enough. And the way in which I would suggest planning your exam would be to skim through the question first. Don't read through it word for word and make notes or analyze every single sentence, because you don't know what the question is yet. They don't know what they're actually asking you. So reading through all the reference material, reading through all the material within the question and thinking about what it could mean is irrelevant until you actually know what they're asking. So skim through it first, identify the requirements, then create a very basic structure based around those requirements. So if, for example, the first requirement is about purchasing a certain company, then maybe set out your requirements about the advantages and disadvantages of acquisitions, or the problems that can come from acquisitions. And the second half is how this will affect the share price. Then maybe have a list of potential things that will impact the share price. And so now you've got almost a list of bullet points that you can start, when you do start writing, you can just turn those bullet points into paragraphs. And that's how you go from a blank page to a fairly constructive answer quite quickly. And once you've done that, is then you go back to the question. Now you read through the question knowing what you are looking for. So then you can start bringing bits of information from the reference material into your plan, from other bits of the unseen, also bits from the pre-seen into your exam as well. And again, it's also really important you do this because the examiners don't like it when you do not use the pre-seen material or the unseen material, because they've given it to you 6 weeks ahead of time. They expect you to use it, and the examiner report that is published after every exam sitting since May 2015, every single exam report has said students don't reference the pre-seen enough. which seems ridiculous that getting it 6 months in advance, you still don't use the information enough. So it's very important to use that. And then also add in any additional things from the various different syllabi that you can. So reference risk for P3, reference strategy for E3, reference funding for F3, because that's where you get your integration marks. And remember that there are 9 integration marks at the strategic case study level. So that is 9% of your overall marks will come from simply linking the various different syllabuses together. So it's really important that you mention that. And once you've added in all these various different bits, you'll have quite a substantial list of bullet points. And then essentially, you just turn those into your answer. You have this list of bullet points now, and all you need to do is take those bullet points and expand each point out into a paragraph, and there you should have a really, really good answer. And this method has been taught by us here at Strategy for several years now, and it has passed hundreds and hundreds of students from throughout the case study. And it's really successful because we're a fairly small college. We're not one of the huge colleges like a BBP or Kaplan, yet we have incredible pass rates and an incredible amount of people in the top 10. In fact, 2 of our students were in the top 10 in the world in the last sitting, and over the course of last year, we had 18 students throughout the 3 different case study exams in the top 10 in the world. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that our method works. So moving on to the, I think that question was actually in a sense been asked by quite a few of you. So I think a few of those have been answered. Paul says, what's the best way to answer a question if you cannot remember a model? So as we say, there's no marks purely for mentioning theory, but it is useful to structure your answer around a model. If you can't think of a specific model, or the actual question doesn't have a specific model that suits it, a good way to think of it is just to break it down by impact in certain fields of the organization. So if you think of the financial impact, you think of the strategic impact, you think of the stakeholder impact. And then it's not a model as such, but it is a way that breaks it down, breaks the answer down, allows you to focus on the various different components of the organization and how this particular issue presented to you in the unseen will affect the organization from a holistic perspective. And so that's also a very good way of thinking about it. It's just to think of it from a strategy point of view, a financial point of view, and a stakeholder point of view. A couple of comments here about, or a couple of questions that have come in surrounding the basic idea of whether or not spelling is important. Now, not to say that spelling and grammar and flow of the text is not important, because some of your integration marks do come from the overall feel of your script. And if it's all over the place, then that's unlikely to be something that scores too highly in integration. But CIMA is a worldwide exam. It's sat by thousands of students all over the world, many of whom will not speak English as a first language, yet all CIMA exams are done in English. And so therefore, CIMA have specifically stated that spelling and grammar will not affect your grade, because it would be unfair to students who are not native English speakers, and it would be an unfair advantage to students who were native English speakers. So spelling and grammar will not affect your actual grade. The question here about competencies and identifying the different competencies and how to answer those. And this is not a new question. This is a question I've been asked so many times, every single sitting, and my answer is the same every time. Do not worry about the competencies. And you have the 4 different competencies. So you have the technical, the business, the people, and the leadership. And there's 25 marks out of 100 for each of those 4 different competencies. But those are simply, in a sense, houses for topics. So certain topics sit under technical, certain topics sit under people, leadership, and so on. There is not a different approach to answering a technical question. There is no need to identify which competencies. Please do not spend your precious exam time worrying about whether this is a technical competence question, whether this is a business competence question, because it's simply not important. The only thing you need to consider is how to answer the question and getting on and answering the question. The one thing that is important about competencies, though, is that you have to score a minimum amount in every single competence. And even if you get enough marks to pass overall, you can still fail the exam if you have not got the required level in each competence. But this is not about identifying competencies. This is more of a time management issue and ensuring that you get on and attempt to answer every single requirement and sub-requirement, which is a different issue altogether. But with regards to your specific question there about identifying the competencies, yes, that you can identify the competencies, but it will not help you pass the exam at all. Please do not waste your time trying to answer the competencies or try to identify it, to change the way in which you approach the question, because there's simply no difference in how you answer a technical question, how you answer a people question. So please do not worry about it. Question here about the International Financial Reporting Standards. Whether you need to know the reporting standards for the Strategic Case Study exam or not is up for debate. The fact of the matter is you will not be specifically tested on your knowledge of international financial reporting standards, because as you've said there, it's an F3 topic. Your knowledge of the international financial reporting standards is tested in the F3 exam, and it's not a specific thing for the strategic case study. Generally, unless it states otherwise, you should assume that the company within the strategic case study, in this instance, the private hospital company Denby, is abiding by international financial reporting standards. And it will tell you otherwise. It will tell you if there is a particular issue in the unseen exam which shows that it's not abiding by it. And also a side note on the international financial reporting standards, because there were some changes to them recently, is that CIMA has specifically stated that the new standards are examinable. So please bear in mind that there are some new standards to the international financial reporting standards, and that they are considered examinable. So please make a note of those new standards. If you look on the CIMA website, you can find it's only a couple of little standards that have changed, so it's not a huge deal. Question about industry examples now. And industry examples are very important, and it is useful to use industry examples. There are no specific marks given for industry examples in the same way that there was in the old T4 exam, where there was an actual official mark allocation purely for industry examples. But they really do help with the you're demonstrating your knowledge of the question, because it also shows to the examiner that you've done external research, that you've done outside research. So whenever possible, I would try to use an industry example. in the industry example pack that we produce here, there is 25 industry examples based on the top 10 most likely issues, which you can use. But it all depends on whether or not a industry example is actually useful. Only use one if it adds value to your argument, because if it doesn't add value to your argument, then it's fairly pointless to ask it or to use it, because it's not really adding anything. But the best students do use industry examples, and that's another thing that the examiner has specifically said several times in their examiner's reports. Question about time management and developing points. I hope that question has, for the most part, been covered in the spiel I made earlier about time management and planning, and how to break down your points, how to generate ideas by skimming through, building a basic structure, thinking about stakeholders, thinking about funding, thinking about the strategy of the business, the organization, etc. So hopefully that has, in a sense, been answered. What I would say about time management, a good way to ensure that you are managing your time effectively is to always keep an eye on the clock. There's a little clock in the corner of the Pearson VUE system, which is a system that you'll use for your exam. And if you, for example, say you've got 60 minutes for the question, you spend 15 minutes planning, so you've basically got 22.5 minutes for each requirement. So if you spend far more than 22.5 minutes on the first requirement, you're not going to have enough time to properly answer the second requirement. And that is also a mistake that students make. Because basically a tip is, and studies have shown this, that you pick up far more marks in the first half of your answer than you do in the second half of it. And so the reason for that is because you get all your really good ideas down quickly, you get them down first, and then you're worrying about what else you can put, you're struggling to put other things. So why spend time finishing off the second half of your first requirement when you could be starting the first half of your second requirement, which will actually gain you more marks? And this also links back to what I was saying earlier about the competencies as well, where you have to meet the minimum standard in all the competencies. So the standard format for the last few sittings with the strategic case study has been one question, or the first question with 2 sub-requirements, second question with 2 sub-requirements, third question with 4 sub-requirements. So if, say, people competence is the second half of the second question and the fourth quarter of the third question, and you spend all your time messing around with the earlier requirements, you may get a really good mark overall. You may absolutely smash all the other questions, but you would actually not get any people marks because you did get onto the people requirements, and therefore you would actually still fail the exam even if you passed overall. Some more technical questions now, one about the value chain and one about competitive forces. So with the value chain, it's potentially a useful model, but it's not something that I would recommend you spend all your time doing in between now and the exam, comprising your own, creating your own value chain for Denby, because yes, it would be fairly easy to do it. You think about the inbounds, you think about the equipment that they use, you think about the operational facilities that they have there, etc. But one thing about value chain is it's only arisen in the strategic case study once or twice throughout almost 20 sittings now. And in the instance that it did appear, the value chain was actually given within the pre-scene, because it was about a theme park organization, and the value chain was really specific and really important to certain parts of their operations, or using the value chain effectively. And the value chain is primarily tested at operational level, with a certain sense of testing it occasionally at management level. It's not considered to be a strategic level model. It's not examined particularly at strategic level. So I wouldn't recommend spending too much time worrying about value chain. And the KHS, it depends really on whether you consider it to be a competitor. I mean, you could argue that it's actually a customer of Denby, because they send a lot of business our way because of the restrictions brought in for the National Health Service, where they cannot allow certain patients to wait more than 15 weeks to be seen. So they end up sending them to private practice to be seen within the limit. What I would probably say was it was more of a substitute than a competitor. So if you're thinking of your Porter's five forces, with your various different impacts on the competitiveness and the profitability of the industry, they would fall more as substitutes. Competitors would be your Postars and your Brontes, the specific private hospital organizations would be the competitors. The National Health Service within Keelan would be more of a substitute for the service provided. If your questions have disappeared, I don't know whether there is a limit on when questions can be posted, or how far in advance questions can be posted on YouTube. So if they have been removed, I would suggest simply typing them again and they will appear. Lorraine, the best possible advice I can give for the strategic case study exam is to just practice as much as possible, whether that's using the Astranti mocks, whether that's using the BPP mocks, the Pearson VUE mocks, anything like that. There's the one thing, probably more than anything else, which causes students to fail is the lack of exam practice, the lack of planning, the lack of time management, the lack of exam technique, all of which are dealt with by more exam practice. Yes, the session is going to be recorded. It's being recorded as we speak. And once this stream has finished, a copy of this class will be available on the same link that it has, or that you are on right now. This very link will also become the link for the recording of the class. Paul, there are certain calculators that you are allowed to take into the exam. If you look on the CIMA website and the Pearson VUE website, you should be able to find a list. One thing I would note is that the strategic case study exam also provides you with a calculator in terms of it's one built into the system that you can click on. But calculations are not imperative. You will not be asked to perform any calculations in the strategic case study exam, so you may not need a calculator anyway. The provision has increased. Both that could be the fact that there has been economic problems, perhaps in particularly with regards to overseas patients. We saw that overseas patients had declined dramatically by nearly 30% from year to year. And so the reason why the provisions would increase was because they're basically creating provisions that some of their debts will not be paid. So it could be due to it could be due to the fact that there's been economic issues with overseas patients, etc., and as a result, some or bills are not being paid, so to speak. For the pass rate for the exam, the pass rate, the pass mark that is needed for the exam is about 60%. It depends because it is a scaled score, and the scaled score is adjusted by CIMA themselves depending on how well everyone else did in the exam. So if you get a really, really difficult paper, don't worry, because the chances are everyone will have done really badly on that paper. The pass mark will go down. If you get a really easy paper, then the chances are everyone will do well on that paper and the pass mark will actually go up. So it's just a case of doing the best that you can possibly do with the exam that you actually get. Gabriel, all the things about the name and the format, the to, from, email things is all given for you. There's no need to type in any of that, and you wouldn't get any marks or anything for that. So some critical success factors for Denby staff, probably the most important critical success factor, because everything is about the staff. Everything is about, even their mission statement talks about staff, and they are really, really important to how the organization operates, providing the best possible healthcare. So that's probably one of the most important things to consider. And with regards to models, a few questions here about models. There are no marks just for using theoretical models. It depends on how you use them. I do recommend using them as a way to split up your answer, because it provides a natural framework, so to speak, but there is no direct marks for using them. And so, as another person's mentioned there, that if they accidentally write the incorrect name for a model, it's not going to cost you marks, because you wouldn't have got marks for using that model in the first place. Question there about the share cap. It's unlikely that there has been any changes in shares over the last year, because of that the cap has stayed the same. Also, the intangible assets within the balance sheet has remained the same, within the statement of financial position has remained the same. And we know that the intangible assets are generally the result of intellectual property bought from other organizations, perhaps by purchasing them, and that the organization grows by swapping shares in the parent company for the subsidiary that it's trying to buy. And so the fact that there's been no change in the intangibles and no change in the market cap would suggest that there has been no purchases in the last year. Yes, you can use examples from your own country. The industry examples do not have to be based in the UK, even though the organization appears to be based in a country which sounds a bit like the UK. Doesn't mean you need to use UK industry examples. You can use industry examples from all around the world. After all, the exam itself is a fictional company set in a fictional country, so it doesn't really matter if you use examples from anywhere. With regards to big data, it's likely to be linked with security. Big data is very important for security at the moment, particularly with all these advancements in things like blockchain and all these other sorts of advancements in Web 4.0, 5.0, all these sorts of things. And so something to do with security is particularly relevant, particularly given that it's dealing with a huge amount of hospital data. And so having a system in place to protect all the information of patients will be critical. And there was an issue in the UK actually recently with the Google DeepMind scandal, where there was misuse of NHS patient information, which is a prime example of perhaps why you need to have high levels of security in these sorts of organizations for patient data, because when health is involved, when patients' personal information is involved, suddenly there is a much higher level of security expected. The best piece of advice, I would say, I said to another student already, is to just do as much exam practice as possible, because it's really, really important to ensure that you're planning effectively, to show that you have a good exam technique, to show that you have good time management, all of which can be helped by planning. The reason why sales have dropped, or sales haven't necessarily dropped, but share price could be for a number of different reasons. The funny thing is that the geared beta and the ungeared beta were quite low, which suggests that there is quite a low risk involved in the organization, and yet the share price has changed. So that's a peculiar scenario, because it suggests that it's low risk and there's no need for the share price to be so volatile unless the industry itself is volatile. Another reason could be that they paid a huge proportion in dividends last year, which could be signaling to the market that they do not have any ideas for how to reinvest the money. And also, simply you're taking money out of the organization. You pay dividends out, that's money that the company no longer has. That's money that is no longer contributing to the net worth of the organization. With Porters, I'd say that it was falling under a differentiation strategy, in fact, a focused differentiation strategy even, because it's not appealing to a mass market. It's appealing to a very specific market, essentially of individuals and insurance companies that are wealthy enough to afford private healthcare. Yes, specific areas that are going to be important, or I can foresee likely issues in the exam. Staffing issues would be one. Issues regarding the fact that the governor for the health governor, Minister for Keeland, is going to potentially stop KHS doctors from working part-time for private companies. Ethics is going to be important as well. Ethics is always important in the strategic case study exam, and it's particularly going to be important for this kind of company, given the nature of the industry. So with regards to integrated reporting, there's a chance that it might come up. It has come up in a couple of previous case studies. It's probably not quite large enough for an organization to worry too much about integrated reporting and about GRI, etc., because usually that is for enormous multinational organizations. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of the question list. It also brings us to the to the end of the half an hour, just to overrun it slightly. There's a couple more questions just come in here. Hedging, it's possible that there could be something to do with currency hedging because of the article that's been included, as Samantha has just brought up there, and why it seems so out of place that perhaps, and particularly given that there's been a drop in overseas trade, that there could be some issues with the value of the K dollar. One thing I would say is you just need to know of it or be aware of it from a, in a sense, strategic perspective of how hedging prevents the loss felt by changes in the exchange rate. You do not need to actually calculate futures. You do not actually need to calculate options, etc., because that was all tested in your F3 and your P3. There are no calculations in the strategic case study exam. And if a doctor's flexible time is withdrawn, there's not too much that we can do, because the government will be in charge of doing that. And so what could happen is that the company has to hire senior doctors, which means that that's going to be a huge expense, huge increase in operational expenses due to the cost of doctors. Well, an example, essentially, yes, we're just going to have to accept it, or we can bring on different doctors, perhaps reduce the number of doctors, which could affect it. There's nothing that we as Denby can do, because it's ultimately the control of the government, and what the government says is what goes. Example about could be that the doctors who work for the case, and it said in the pre-scene that doctors state that it says that some of the doctors work in the KHS, and then they often ask people to see them privately as well. So an ethical issue could be that you have a doctor who's seeing a particular patient and thinks, well, I could treat this person here at the KHS. It's going to take about 5 hours of my time, but why would I treat them for 5 hours here when I could treat them at Denby for twice the money? So if a doctor is sending patients to private practice so they can earn more money while they're treating them, that's an ethical issue. Likewise, if we could treat a patient for $10,000 and we can either treat them by or weeks of ongoing treatment, medication, etc., and the surgery is more profitable, but actually not in the patient's best interest. If that's the one we are suggesting, the best thing to purchase is the mock exams, because the mock exams are, again, as I've said a few times throughout this session, is best possible practice. And I think it's over. I'll call this to a close. So as mentioned, this class recording will be available on this same link. And please do subscribe to our videos, as we will be posting more throughout the run-up to the exam and post the exam week. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you found it useful, and best of luck in your exam.